Go ahead.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anarita Bashalieva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Shrey. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to use the chat to post questions for our guests. A quick greeting to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким поклоном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you. Today's guest will be introduced by Dr. Victor Fett. The rest of us turn off our cameras. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anara. I am very pleased to welcome back John Sennett, talking to us from Kyiv. John and his wife Natasha have been with us last week. Please watch their first part of personal interview. Today, John agreed to talk to us mainly on the very important subject which came on years before the current war and continues to be one of the most contentious issues in current Ukrainian cultural life during the war. This is the situation with Orthodox Christian Church, or rather to say churches, in the independent country of Ukraine. We will welcome all kinds of questions after John's presentation. He is an active participant and parishioner of the Ukrainian Orthodox Christian Church right there in Kyiv, and I'm sure he can tell us everything from also American viewpoint, being expat in Ukraine. Welcome, John.
Okay, thank you, Victor. And glad to be back, and thank you for having me again. So we're going to talk about the current Orthodox Christian situation, and really, I'm an outsider. I'm not Ukrainian. I don't have any Ukrainian blood. I became Orthodox because my wife, Natasha, is what we call cradle Orthodox. So a convert like me is somebody who converts to Orthodoxy. A cradle Orthodox is somebody who's born into the faith. And then the picture you see in the first slide there is of Oles Hanchar. He's a Ukrainian, or was a Ukrainian Soviet writer. He wrote a book called Sobor, which translates to the cathedral. It was the first Ukrainian book or Ukrainian author other than Gogol that I ever read when I was in the war. And it's about the church during the war. And it's available for free on the University of Toronto website, which I gave to Larry. So we're going to move on here to the next slide. Okay. So if you remember from last week, and if you don't, we were in Chernivtsi for 4 months because there was no electricity and no internet. So we decided to return back to Kyiv in early March of 2023. This was during the time of Great Lent, which is a very serious time for us within the Orthodox Church. We were not able to attend church in Chernivtsi, and so I'm going to go into that a little bit and why. The problem with it is that we didn't know what jurisdiction the church fell under, and there's 3 jurisdictions within Ukraine. And while we were in Chernivtsi, the SBU, which is the State Security Service of Ukraine, was raiding churches under what are called the Moscow Patriarchate. And the church, which was only 100 meters from where we were staying, was one of the churches that was raided, and they found out that the bishop there was actually a Russian citizen in Chernivtsi and spreading Russian propaganda through the church, which was called St. Nicholas Church there. So we didn't feel comfortable going to a church in Chernivtsi not knowing who to trust, really. In Kyiv, we knew who to trust because we had been going to that church for a while. And it's very difficult for us because we pretty much go every week to some sort of service being Orthodox. So it's not a necessity, but it's something that has helped us to get through the war. And in fact, our religion has helped us get through the war on a spiritual level, which also helps us on a psychological level. So I'm going to go into the 3 Orthodox jurisdictions which are currently operating within Ukraine. Okay, this is St. Michael's Monastery. It's right in the center of Kyiv. It was actually destroyed by the Soviets, and it's been rebuilt since 1991. It is officially called the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, OCU. Officially, it was granted autocephaly by the Ecumenical Patriarch in Constantinople in 2019, January 5th, 2019. The leader of that church, which is elected by all the bishops within the church, his name is Metropolitan Epiphanasius. Officially, the OCU, it operates over 6,000 parishes. I put all the numbers there for you so you can see. And I guess what I should state is that 72% of Ukrainians identify as Orthodox. That doesn't mean that they're active in the church. They identify as Orthodox. So it's pretty much the majority religion within Ukraine. And that's why there's a lot of confusion going on, because technically there are 3 Orthodox jurisdictions operating within the borders of Ukraine. Now, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, the one that I'm showing here, is the one that is most recognized by that is officially recognized by the government as being the official Ukrainian church. It doesn't mean that they don't recognize the other ones. It just means that that is the one that President Poroshenko was the one who pushed for what is called autocephaly. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as I go. But autocephaly means that the church becomes self-governing. It doesn't fall underneath of another patriarch, like the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Patriarch of Moscow, the Patriarch of Alexandria, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the Patriarch of Romania. Once it's granted autocephaly, it doesn't necessarily get its own patriarch, but it does become self-ruling. And then there are certain canonical laws, which is very detailed, that allow it to do things that it can't do if it's not autocephalous. So we're going to move to the next one. Now, this is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kyiv Patriarchate. Not an official patriarch. This is my church, so I need to say that. That's the church that I attend. And I didn't start attending there, and Natasha didn't start attending there for any Orthodox political reasons. It just happens to be the closest church to our house. Obviously, as we became parish members and got more involved and understood the situation, we became a little bit sympathetic to what they're arguing as far as against autocephaly, and I'll go into that in a second. But the picture that you see right there is from this past Pascha, which is Easter, where everybody's standing around outside the church waiting for their baskets to be blessed for Easter. So originally, the church merged with the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. However, there was a dispute over the Tomos of autocephaly, in that the Ecumenical Patriarch, which is based in Constantinople, took over all the diasporan churches, which is that every church outside of Ukraine now falls not under Ukraine's jurisdiction, not under the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kyiv Patriarch's jurisdiction, but under the Ecumenical Patriarch. So there's a big dispute about that, because allegedly it was promised that those would fall under the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and that was one of the problems that the Tomos of autocephaly caused. Now, Patriarch Philaret, who's the Orthodox Church of Ukraine recognizes as a bishop, who we call Patriarch. He's 94 years old. He's been serving for a long time. He served as a monk at Kiev's Pechersk Lavra, which was built in the 11th century, and there's going to be more about that coming ahead. We don't really have figures on how many parishes or clergy fall under this church. Now, there's a heavy cultural influence by Patriarch Filaret because he is the oldest serving bishop, to my knowledge, within Ukraine. So he's been through a lot, he's seen a lot, he's obviously lived through World War II and seen all of that as well. So now you have Patriarch Filaret and Metropolitan Epiphanasius, who recognize each other, but they're not really on the same page, so to speak. Now we're going to move into the Moscow Patriarch. So this is the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarch, who they said they separated from Moscow, but really they didn't. There's canonical law that's not being obeyed as far as when you separate yourself from your patriarchal church. So it claims not to be. The Metropolitan is Onofri, we call him Onofrius. Right now, they still hold part of the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra, which is what you see in the background there. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. They were supposed to leave, but they haven't left. So some of the monks are still there. And if you look at the numbers, as far as the number of parishes, monasteries, bishops, and clergy, and including monastics, they outnumber all the others. They outnumber the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. They outnumber the Kiev Patriarch as far as we know. That has a smaller following than the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. So therefore, Moscow Patriarch still controls the majority of the Orthodox parishes within Ukraine. And that's where the bone of contention is. And it's a big bone of contention. I can tell you that right now. We see it on a regular basis here. And I'll go into a little bit more of that as we go. So this will give you an idea of how much land property the Moscow Patriarch controls within Ukraine. It gives you the charts. This was put out by an organization called NGL Media, which is independent of the Orthodox Church. But if you look at it, it's just, those are the number of buildings and those are the number of land plots that they either own or they have as far as communal property is concerned. The chart on the right shows communal property, private property, state-owned, and then some of it obviously is unknown. With the sheer number of properties that are controlled, it's devastating. And I'm hoping that when I pull up the next page, it'll show you a map. I'm not real great at technology, so you have to bear with me, but let me see if I can get this to work. Are you guys seeing that? Can somebody say yes or no?
We see a link to the map, but we don't see the map just yet.
Okay. It might take a little while for it to activate.
Okay.
You could try clicking it one more time, I suppose.
Okay. Anything?
You can put no, but you can put the link in the chat, and I can open it from here and try to push it up.
Okay. I'm really terrible at this. So I apologize. And it's not coming up. It's not coming up correctly anyway. So what that shows, and if you want to check the link later, there's a map of Ukraine on there with red dots, and the red dots are all the properties that are controlled by the Moscow Patriarch within Ukraine. And when you look at it, you'd think that most of it is in the east, but there's a huge amount in the west of Ukraine that is controlled by this church. So I'm going to move. Okay. What are the problems? Okay, so a lot of the sites are UNESCO sites. In the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra, ancient Chernihiv, the Pochayev Lavra in Ternopil. The Ministry of Culture and Information Policy has been trying to have the Moscow Patriarch churches removed from all of these properties, but they're having problems on a number of different levels. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard yet, but the current Minister of Culture and Information Policy is now out as of today. He gave his resignation. I think this is one of the reasons that he gave his resignations, and there was a lot of problems with him. So now, when you go to the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra, and you go in to the where they call the Monastery of the Caves, this is where the original part of the monastery is from the 11th century, and is the holiest part of the site. When you go in, there's actually police there that are called dialogue police, because there are a lot of people in Ukraine still who follow underneath the Moscow Patriarch and are loyal to it. Now, most of us here don't understand why. And it's very difficult because the Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill, has come out in favor of the war. And we see Russian priests blessing Russian troops and blessing Russian weapons as they come here to kill Ukrainians. So it's very hard for us to look at that and see it, and see that people here in Ukraine are still supporting it and still attending those churches. It's very, very difficult. Now, I'm an outsider. I don't have Ukrainian blood. I can't imagine what it feels like for an actual Ukrainian to see somebody they know go attend that church. So now I'm putting here the jailing of Metropolitan Pavel. Metropolitan Pavel was the head of the monks, I guess the abbot is what you would call him, of the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra. And he was found to have 2 properties in Kyiv, one right by the Lavra, which was 443 square meters, which I live in 54 square meters, my wife and I and my dog. And then he had a mansion on the other side of the city, which was also 500 square meters. So now this is a monk. And in the Orthodox tradition, monks are supposed to live in poverty, and they're not supposed to have material things, and they're not supposed to practice what we outside the world seek to. So they soon enough found that he had Russian citizenship and that he had a bunch of Russian propaganda, and that they violated some terms of the lease with the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra. And so now Metropolitan Pavel, who they call Mercedes Pavel because he has a brand new Mercedes, is now in jail. And he was under house arrest, and now they put him under full custody. That's how bad things are. Okay. There have been a number of parish confrontations throughout the country. For instance, not long ago, a Ukrainian soldier they were bringing him to have a funeral at a church that was controlled by the Moscow Patriarch. The priests of that church would not let the soldier's body into the church to conduct the funeral. And there was a physical confrontation. Eventually, the police showed up. Everything got worked over. They got the Moscow priests out, put the Ukrainian priests in. But this was all on public display. Daily, and I think I sent one to Victor today, there are, well, not daily, weekly at least now. In April, it was daily. There are confrontations at the Kyiv Pechersk Lavra for those who follow the Moscow Patriarch, because they're denying entry to the Ministry of Culture. They're causing problems when the Ukrainian Orthodox Church wants to hold services, and vice versa. And it's happening all over the country. It's not, we see it here most in Kyiv where we are, but we can check the news and see it everywhere. So the State Security Service, the SBU, has conducted a number of raids. They found child pornography, they found loads and loads of cash, they found Russian propaganda, and they found a bunch of the clergy had Russian citizenship. Now, some of them have just been told to leave. Others have been held and used in prisoner exchanges for Ukrainian soldiers and civilians as well. Okay. Now, despite all this, everything that's going on, there are soldiers, Ukrainian soldiers, fighting for Ukraine on the front lines, asking the government, the Ministry of Culture, not to expel the Moscow Patriarch churches, because that's where they go to church. That's what they grew up, where they grew up going to church. You know, so if a soldier who is fighting and willing to die for Ukraine is saying to the government, please don't close my church, how can the government do that? Like, how can they do that without causing a major problem? So let's go on to the next slide. Hold on. Okay. No easy answer. There's no solution. We don't see a solution. Ukraine is very much a freedom of religion country, despite what you may hear in the media and what you may see. I walk to the center of Kyiv. There's Jehovah's Witnesses at the Golden Gate Park, which is the original gate to enter Kyiv. That's from the 10th or 11th century. There's a synagogue, the main synagogue in Kyiv, down the street, and the main rabbi who was hit, he didn't get hit, but when he was out visiting Kherson, they were shooting rockets at them. There's the Crimean Tartars who were Muslim. There's Buddhists. There's pagans here too. There's witches that they practice on a hill in Kyiv, right across from St. Andrew's Church. What this is causing is internal struggles within families, communities, and within the military. You know, it's pitting people against each other. The religious issue, the Orthodox religious issue. I don't know. I can't speak for Jews, Muslims, and other religions, but within Orthodoxy, it's pitting people who are normally friendly against each other, because tradition is a big thing within the Orthodox Church. And so when you traditionally have attended a Moscow Patriarch church, that's the church that you become used to. That's the priest that you become used to. And it's tearing people apart. The other thing is that there are private property rights in Ukraine. So anything that the church, the Moscow Patriarch owns in Ukraine that is private property, that you can't just take that away from them. There's no real eminent domain laws or things of that nature. I mean, how do you can't forcibly go and arrest monks and nuns and priests and put them in handcuffs. Just think of that, how that plays out as far as you want to be seen as a democratic country. You just can't do that. And the Moscow Patriarch exploits this. They use the judicial system, even though they speak on an authoritarian level and follow an authoritarian leader. When democracy works in their favor, they use it, and they use it very effectively. They have lawyers who know how to play this game between the communal property and the freedom of religion.
We do not hear you, John. You seem frozen. Oh,
Yeah, he's frozen on my end right now.
Same here.
John, you may have to log out, log back in.
While John is rejoining us, this is absolutely fascinating. It's especially the personal effects. Some people who are put in positions where they're divided from their families because of their views for their church. This is completely unrelated, but when the Soviet Union dissolved and we had contact with the people who would remain faithful in Ukraine, this is for the Catholic Church, it was really complicated because who do you have lead the church? The people who are coming here in freedom, grew up, were educated, and were part of the Ukrainian Catholic Church here in the United States, or the people who sat and really struggled and suffered through decades of horror. And it wasn't really so much a conflict as it was the coming together of two groups who'd experienced the destruction of their church in two very separate ways, and now kind of figuring out how to live together and proceed with the faith. So this what John's talking about is absolutely fascinating. And I think we have him back.
Yes.
Welcome
For some
back.
reason, my laptop acts up. I don't know why
The
when I
fact
do it.
that you're in
laptop-
Ukraine, the fact that you're in Ukraine and able to speak to us is amazing. Thank you for
Yes.
doing that.
I think it's my my lack of capabilities with
You're
technology.
fine. You're fine. Thank you very much.
But that was the last slide anyway. So as you can see, this is an issue that just, you know, it's the majority of the population is Orthodox, and the majority of the churches are under the Moscow Patriarch. And, you know, like, nobody really has a solution. Everybody's arguing about it and talking about it and things of that nature, but there's no way to really resolve it. And you'd have to be a genius. And none of the patriarchs or none of the metropolitans, none of the bishops. So what we do here is we just attend church and try not to get involved on the political dimensions of it. We pay attention to it. We don't go to churches that we don't trust, but we don't necessarily get involved in going to protests or doing anything like that. We listen to we go to our priest and we listen to our priest and do as he tells us. So that's it on. It's a little bit shorter because Natasha's not here, so I have room for questions, or if anybody wants more information, just tell me what you would like to know. I'm a convert, so I tend to do a little bit deeper diving than a lot of the Cradle Orthodox. I want to know what I'm doing and understand where I'm attending. Okay, I see somebody has a question.
Yeah, I do. On one hand, there was at least one instance of a priest who was identified as being a pro-Moscow in his sympathies, and he was dealt with accordingly. I guess he was arrested. But you don't want, the government doesn't want to do this on a broad scale basis for fear of alienating too many people of that religious bent. But on the other hand, are the priests in the Moscow Orthodox churches being a little bit more careful now? Are they afraid of being reported if they say anything out of line? Do you feel that there's maybe some care being taken in terms of what is being said, or are the people in the Moscow churches still blatantly saying what they always said?
Well, first, I'll give you, there's more than one priest that's been arrested. They just don't, but they will not arrest anyone without evidence. So, you know, they go, the security, SBU, the Security Service of Ukraine, is the one that does most of the investigations, and they will only arrest somebody if they find actual hard evidence. They don't do any speculative, anything like that. Some of the Moscow priests, or under the Moscow Patriarch, are loyal to Ukraine, and there's a whole bunch of them that have tried to have dialogue with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and they don't necessarily want to come under its jurisdiction, but at the same time, they're saying, we're not loyal to Moscow as far as their government goes. We're loyal to Patriarch Kirill. So there's that group who, you know, they're somewhat loyal to Ukraine, but on the religious side, they're not. I do think that some of them are curbing what they're saying, but we're still hearing of plenty of them that are not, that are still speaking pro Moscow Patriarch and pro Moscow. It happens every day here. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Well, it's fascinating.
Ukrainians are not afraid to express themselves, no matter what side they're on. That's one thing for sure. Okay, Larry?
John, if you would like me to bring up the map of the Moscow how do you say it? Patriarchate. I could do that.
Yes, that would be helpful to just so that people can see how much control they have.
Can you see it now?
Yes. Now, if you look, you see the concentration in the west of Ukraine, out towards Uzhhorod and Chernivtsi, and right on the border of Romania, and on the border of Hungary, and on the border of Slovakia. And then all around Lviv, there's nothing. They're very pro-Ukrainian, and that's also where a lot of the Greek Catholic Church is. But then it's spread fairly evenly throughout the country, with also a fairly heavy concentration in Odessa and in Kyiv. So that is how much control they have over the religious sphere here. And can the SBU go into every church on every Sunday or on every service and see what the priests are saying and hear what the priests are saying when, you know, the people in that village or in that city are loyal to that church, and nobody's going to turn in their priest? It's really, really difficult to keep track of all that stuff. So, and then people when you go to your church, you want to listen to what the priest says, and it's an influence, a cultural influence. And I used to attend a Moscow Patriarch Church in Florida. They have the Moscow Patriarchate churches throughout the world. You know, did I ever notice that there was a bias? I didn't pay that much attention because I wasn't thinking of war back then. So I can't tell you the messages that are getting out, but we do know that they're getting out. We have people we know within Ukraine who still fall under the Moscow Patriarchate and are still pro-Russian, and they're in Ukraine while we're getting bombed and hit with missiles. So that just gives you a picture of how much control that the Moscow Patriarch has in Ukraine. Any other questions? Comments?
Please, everyone, questions and comments.
Okay, I can talk a little bit about the history, I guess.
Yes, please.
Unless somebody comes up with, okay, so this conflict between the churches goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. The first Orthodoxy came to Kyiv when it was Kyiv and Rus back in, I think the baptism took place in the year 1054, somewhere in that range, or 1054 was when Orthodoxy and Catholicism split. But so Kyiv and Rus in that century, Moscow did not exist at all. It didn't exist for another, 600 years, 400 years. I can't remember exactly. Yeah, that was the split. Thank you, Katerina. So Orthodoxy started here in Kyiv and Rus, in Kyiv, which is Ukraine. It wasn't called Ukraine then, it was called Kyiv and Rus. And eventually, as the Mongol horde came in, the power centers moved away, and then there was contention within Kyiv and Rus within the, I think it was the Rorik dynasty. So where Bulgaria got their own patriarch in the 9th or 10th century, because of the Mongol invasion, and because of the breakup within Kyiv and Rus, Ukraine, Kyiv and Rus, never got its own patriarch, never got autocephaly, even though it should have been granted probably in the 11th century. They should have probably got it. They had proved themselves loyal enough that long. But because of the political situation, Ukraine never got their own autocephaly. So, you know, Moscow's power rose, and then they sort of took over and forced the ecumenical patriarch at the time, and not only forced him, but bribed him to give them autocephaly. And then they decided that Kyiv and Rus no longer exist, so now it's ours. So we're going to take over that as well, as far as not only from a geographical political standpoint, but from a religious standpoint. And so over the years, it just continued to grow, and Moscow considered itself the third Rome. I don't know if any of you out there in the non-Orthodox world know that a lot of the imperial propaganda that's been coming out since, well, Ivan Grozny, Ivan the Terrible, has been that Moscow is the third Rome, because Rome fell, Constantinople fell, and so Moscow became the third Rome as far as Moscow was concerned, meaning that it's some sort of holy place. And the other thing that I can tell you is that, having been an Orthodox in America and now an Orthodox in Ukraine, there's a big difference between Russian Orthodoxy and Ukrainian Orthodoxy, in that Russian Orthodoxy is a very, very severe religion. It's super severe. It almost puts a chain on you that you can't ever get off your back, or a cross on you that you can't ever get off your back. Ukrainian Orthodoxy, on the other hand, is a bit more laid back. It understands the human side and makes it seem like it's more, salvation is more attainable. And when you look at it, Orthodoxy came from Greece, and the Greeks are even more laid back in their Orthodoxy than the Ukrainians are. So what you see is that as Orthodoxy traveled north, it became more severe and more strict, to the point where you can't even hope of accomplishing things within Russian Orthodoxy. Whereas in Ukrainian Orthodoxy, they understand the human side, that we're flawed, we have problems, you just have to try as best you can. You have to come to the sacraments on a regular basis. So that's my observation as an outsider. Ukrainian Orthodox may feel differently about it, but that's how I see it as an outsider. Anyway, any questions at this point? Victor, you want to?
Yes, sure. As I invite everyone, we have more time for questions and comments. Dr. Shrey, I'm sure you can say a couple of words, please.
Oh, this has been I really appreciate this explanation. So I am Eastern Rite Greek Catholic, and I grew up going to Ukrainian Saturday school, so learning Ukrainian history. And I very much appreciate, especially you're helping me. When I was in Ukraine, this is a very long time ago, 20, 30 years ago. We were dressed quite appropriately, and when we visited, I'm talking about these difference between Ukrainian Orthodox and I guess Ukrainian Catholic in terms of it's the attainability of heaven. We were dressed, I believe, appropriately to go into Ukrainian Catholic churches, but to tour a Ukrainian Orthodox church, even it was not appropriate. A lot of our party couldn't go. I think it's because some of the women were wearing pants. They were long pants, but still, and like I'm wearing a t-shirt right now. And so this would have not have been appropriate. We would have had and so it just struck me with when you were talking about how Orthodoxy got more severe as it progressed north. That's just really fascinating. I have friends, we do the great Pascha to prepare for Pascha Veligdin. We do also the great fast, and we're restricted on, Ukrainian Catholics are restricted on meat products and dairy products. But but not the entire 40 days. There's certain Fridays, Wednesdays. But my Orthodox friends, I believe it's no meat all 40 days. Is that correct? If that's
no meat, no eggs, no dairy, no olive oil, no wine.
Okay, so I did not know about the olive oil and wine, and so I really, and it is interesting hearing that you who've come to this not as a cradle Orthodox believer, but as a convert. I mean, it must be, you must see this. I appreciate your perspective on this. For us, like growing up, so we have in the Catholic Church, in the Ukrainian Catholic Church, for Lent, the first week and the last week of Lent are no it's complicated, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday, no meat. Sorry, no meat the whole week, but Monday, Wednesday, Friday, in addition, no dairy. But we are allowed to use olive oil. So I mean, it is kind of, and then it kind of like, then you go through the rest of Lent, no meat on Fridays, and then that last week is no meat, and then no dairy products on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But there's also prayers. There's bowing prayers. We prostrate ourselves. We bless ourselves differently than there's Ukrainian Catholicism shares so much of the beauty of Orthodoxy, which the emphasis there is the majesty and power of God, whereas the Roman Catholic Church is the accessibility and the love of God. And so, and both are true. I mean, both are true. And but the way the rituals that we call it, for example, I suppose in Orthodoxy, it's a liturgy. It's not a mass, right? You call it liturgia.
Yes.
And I think that you bless yourselves 3 fingers for the Trinity, and Christ is both fully God and fully man.
Yes.
Yeah, and then you go from right to left.
Yes.
Yeah. So I appreciate you talking a little bit about the history, because as you say, Christianity came to what was Kyiv and Rus, and then something happened in 1054. There's a split, and all the churches that were evangelized out of Constantinople became Orthodox, and all those evangelized out of Rome became Catholic. And then in 1596, that part of the map that had very little red circles on it, that in 1596, the western part of Ukraine came back to the Roman Catholic Church, but was allowed to keep its rituals. So is the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, the various, so Ukrainian Greek Catholics have the experience to some extent, definitely the way the churches look, the iconostasis, the way the sacraments are presented. I appreciate very much your history. So, and I apologize for babbling. There's, you grow up knowing bits and things, and you live your life one way, and then someone comes and kind of puts it in a historical context. It's very helpful, and I really appreciate that.
Well, you're welcome. And well, you should know that the liturgy is the same. We do the same liturgy as you do. You do the same liturgy as us. However, there's more similarity between Ukraine or all Orthodoxy and Greek Catholic than there is between you and Rome.
Absolutely, yeah.
It comes down to.
In fact, there was this debate about the filioque. I don't know how to say this. There's part of the creed that proceeds from the Father and the Son and is worshipped and glorified, or there's something equal to, there's some phrase there that recently
exactly what it is. Yes. Okay. You want me to tell you?
Yes, yes, because I think just very recently the Ukrainian Catholic Church, which now has a patriarchate, they actually have aligned that language with the Orthodox, I believe.
Yes, and it's because of the Greek Catholics that we went to December 25th. What?
Wait, no more Gregorian calendar, no more Julian calendar?
No, only for Pascha. Only for Pascha.
Wow.
Yes, that was voted on.
Wow.
For Conorata. Right. Yes, proceeds from the Father. Larry's right. He put it there. So in Orthodoxy, the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father only, not from the Father and the Son. And that's the difference between that. That was the big split in 1054. It was over that one phrase, really.
Wow.
So, do they make a big issue of it now? Not really. I mean, we say the Nicene Creed, and I'm sure that the Greek Catholics do. We say that before communion.
Yes.
We say that, and then after that, we do some more liturgical stuff, and then we say the Lord's Prayer, and then it's confession and communion for us. So, but there's a big unity between the Greek Catholics here and the Orthodox. They get along really, really well overall. And in fact, my bishop in Philadelphia, Bishop Luke, he's constantly meeting with
Jack.
Yeah, Bishop Luke Joba at St. Nicholas Church in the Northern Liberties. And who blessed my place here about 2.5 months before the war started, before he went back to Philly. So
in the diaspora, the Ukrainian Catholics, Ukrainian Orthodox get along extremely well as well. Like that's in the diaspora community. It's the relationships are very good, are excellent.
I see Ukrainians as very open as far as religion goes. They don't judge other people. Maybe you're going to have some old grandmas, of course. We're going to have them anywhere who are no. But like in general, the general population is very, very tolerant of everybody's belief. As long as you don't push your belief on them, which I sit there and I walk my dog by the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I said, and I never see anybody talking to them. I'm like, you guys have got to have patience.
We had, when I was in Ukraine, it was right after actually it was before the Soviet Union dissolved, and again right afterwards. And I think it was probably my second trip. I walked into this little village, and someone had given me from here, a Ukrainian Bible. And which I like, it's actually easier for me to read the Bible in English than it is in Ukrainian, just because I live here. This has become the language I'm most comfortable with. And so, but I walked into this little village, and I clearly looked like an outsider. And I remember getting to like the middle, like after walking maybe about the equivalent of 3 or 4 blocks, kind of people looking in their windows, kind of peeking out, coming to the side of the road. And then I didn't know what to say, so I turned around and I said, Slava Isusu Christu, which is how Ukrainians here greet, glory be to Jesus Christ, how Ukrainians here can greet each other. So everybody thought I was a nun, which is really funny, except for I wasn't dressed like a nun. But people were like shocked and were like coming out, and like so. And I do speak Ukrainian, and thankfully it aligns with the Ukrainian of Western Ukraine, because that's where all the immigrants that I know came from. And I had a Bible, and somebody invited me into their house, and we were talking, and I think I said the Hail Mary, which is a little different. It's not a complete translation from how it is in English. And the reason I said at someone's request, and then I could hear like somebody sort of crying, and it was a very dark it was a village, so the whole place was maybe 30 feet by 15 feet, dirt floors, thatched roofs. And I could hear someone crying, but it wasn't like sad crying. It was like emotional. And then I realized there was someone else in the room, and it was a woman in her, I don't know, the grandmother who remembered hearing those prayers a long time ago before I guess religion was persecuted. And so I was like, oh my, so it was very sweet. It was this really beautiful moment. And I had this Bible with me, just happened to have in my backpack. And so I asked if they'd want it, and they were very excited about it. But the son came in and scrutinized it really carefully to make sure it wasn't like something not legitimate. It was interesting to see this thirst for religion, this fascination that an American would share their faith, and at the same time, this completely understandable suspicion. This is back in the 1991 or something like that. They're completely understandable. Like, what exactly is this? Are you? Because I wasn't there to not a missionary, but and because we said, don't push your faith on us, right? It was different how the 3 generations reacted to me.
Right. Well, I speak a very tiny amount of Ukrainian, a very tiny amount of Russian. I serve behind the altar in my church here.
That's great.
Because the liturgy is the same in all languages. Yeah. I can follow the liturgy because I know the liturgy, because I've attended church long enough that I'm still, obviously, I've only been an altar server for about a month. I'm still learning the nuances, but I now serve in a Ukrainian church over top of a monastery, which is built on one of the original monasteries of Kyiv, where the relatives of Volodymyr Monomakh are buried. Yes, so wow. It's like I said, it's a very open society as far as religion goes. That's my viewpoint of it, and I'm an outsider.
Thank you, John. I want to introduce, as we have time, one other issue which our viewers may not be completely familiar with, and I'm sure there are some who can talk about it among our live viewers right now, but I looked very briefly. I didn't know anything about this issue. It's a language issue. I didn't know, for example, that the Bible was, well, as many of us know who come from the Soviet Union, the service and the Bible were in Church Slavonic language, the Old Slavic, And the modern Russian, for example, text did not exist until 19th century.
Yes.
With Ukrainian, since Ukrainian language was suppressed under Russian Empire, it looks like the first, for example, translation of first books of the Bible, the Torah, was done in Lemberg in Western Ukraine under Austro-Hungary
Yes.
by Panteleimon Kulish. So it was a Ukrainian text, but it was not clearly used in Russian Empire. And so this Lemberg is Lviv, where Katerina family is from. So these complex issues of geography and I would say linguistics, they appeared in our program from time to time, but I just want to remind everyone that Ukraine, western part of Ukraine never belonged to Russian Empire until Soviet times, essentially. Therefore, I wonder which languages do, my question can be summarized like this. Are both languages used by both churches?
Okay. Slavonic was used for a long time. And the funny thing about Slavonic is it's basically a Kievan Rus language. So Ukrainians understand Church Slavonic a lot easier than Russians do because it's the ancient language of Ukraine. Our priest does probably 90% of the liturgy in Ukrainian now, with a little bit of Church Slavonic here and there. Within the Moscow Patriarchate, it's still all Church Slavonic. And I think that the bishops leave it to their own priests to make their decisions. Now, within the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, they've now started publishing all of the liturgical books in Ukrainian, all of the prayers and the akathists and the molebins, which these are all prayer ritual or services. They're all now being printed in Ukrainian and conducted in Ukrainian. So each church makes its own decision. Obviously, the Moscow Patriarch is still using Church Slavonic. The Kyiv Patriarch, which is probably the most Ukrainian of the two Ukrainian churches, they're trying to go all Ukrainian, and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is also now, they've got a printing press, and they're also trying to go all Ukrainian. So I think that if a priest conducted a service in Church Slavonic, it wouldn't be an issue, though, because it's not Russian. And even though I walk down the street every day and hear Russian, nobody's getting persecuted for speaking Russian. You know, that is all a fallacy that you hear. I'm saying this for Kyiv. I can only speak for Kyiv. I hear Russian every day, all day. I can distinguish between the two languages for the most part. But as far as liturgically goes, I can't say what the majority are outside of Kyiv, but I know within Kyiv, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kyiv Patriarch are pretty much almost all Ukrainian.
Thank you, John. I correct myself. It is issue, therefore, not of two languages, but of three.
Three, yes, it is.
And it is complicated for our viewers. Church Slavonic, for a person who was raised in Russian language, it's not completely comprehensible. But then, as far as I know, Orthodox priests are not required to do sermons in those languages like a Protestant pastor would do. No. So you don't hear someone actually talking, discussing issues in those languages, in liturgic language.
No, nobody would understand it.
Right.
Ukrainians may catch a little bit of. I think that Leonard has a question.
Yes, please, Leonard.
Okay, John, in your initial discussion, you talked about freedom of religion in Ukraine, and you cited a synagogue and Islamic, and you did mention the Jehovah's Witnesses, but you didn't mention any other Protestant, and the more recent conversation with Katrina would indicate that maybe there is some other Catholic other than the Orthodox. But how significant does the more Western traditional Protestant and Western Catholic play any significant role here, or are they a factor whatsoever, either religiously or politically, in the war?
Well, there's a large amount of Ukrainian Baptists throughout the country. In fact, one of the guys that I support, who goes to the front line once a week to take supplies to the troops, is actually a like evangelical Ukrainian biker. So, and he has many other brothers within Ukraine who fall under that. So Protestantism is here, but it's a minority. It is, but and then lately during the war, the strange thing is that there are Dianetics posters all over the place for Scientology, all over the city. I see the L. Ron Hubbard book, which they weren't here prior to the war, and then all of a sudden, about 4 months into the war, you start seeing these Dianetics posters around. So I guess Scientology is here also.
Wow. Okay.
I have one question for you, maybe a little more political than you would like, John, but do you think the Patriarch Kirill should be charged as a war criminal?
Ooh. Well, I have no authority in that standpoint, but yes, I do. My personal opinion, I do, because he's clearly come out. But can you put a patriarch on trial at The Hague? How do you do that?
Probably the Vatican.
It would just cause more problems, and it would not, that political problems and religious problems. And he is the leader of 190 million Orthodox believers. He's the largest the Moscow Patriarch is the largest in the world, and they have more than anybody else. So, my personal opinion, I don't like him. I think he's former KGB and possibly former Russian mafia. And what I think doesn't really matter. I only think of it because I'm personal and I'm here and I see and I've heard what he has said, and I used to love him. I've been to Christ the Savior Cathedral in Moscow myself, but I have a different viewpoint as being somebody who's in the war. So maybe my perspective is not the best, but yet personally, yes, I think he should be, but I don't think that he will be.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your honesty, and I fully agree with you personally. And I know that we are rather judgmental in this program as well, because we are in the war. The one other mentioned thing by you in the very beginning was the book named Cathedral by Ales Hanchar. And you might not know that it was translated into English by Professor Leonid Rudnitsky, who is a frequent guest and invaluable commentator on this program. And maybe Katerina can say a couple of words about him.
Oh my goodness. I remember that project really, really well. It's first of all, it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story. I actually taught it when I was at the University of North Carolina because the translation had just come out. My dad, Leonid Rudnitsky, he wishes he could be with us on this program. He talks about Ales Hanchar as one of the typical saying is you don't want to meet your heroes because you're often disappointed. But he said that Hanchar was the exception to that he was gracious and wise and extremely talented and just a profoundly good human being. Translating the Cathedral was a work of love for my dad. There was another author, Yuri Tkach, another translator, who I think was in Australia, and so they did it back and forth. This is before the internet, so that was quite a feat. I remember the specific focus on the dialogue. They wanted to do justice to Hanchar's dialogue because the main character, it's been years, I think Yelka maybe, like they wanted to do justice to the dialogue. And so they would talk to students in Ukrainian schools who are Americans kind of growing up, like, does this sound right? Does this sound right? This is what we're trying to get. So there was a lot of work put into that. There's one section of it where there's a perspective of an older man sort of like looking back on his life, and you could extract that whole chapter. It's almost a freestanding short story. It's so good.
Yes.
And so it just, so thank you, Victor, for the chance to talk about this. Ales Konchar is a worthy figure in Ukrainian literary history, but also his granddaughter continues her good work. She was one of my father's students, spent a lot of time at our house here in America. She now has children of her own. Like that whole family has been central to Ukraine's cultural development and preserved both language, literature, and just a lovely group of people.
Yes, Natasha also read it in English, so she read the same translation. And he lived, only a few blocks from our house in the writers. We live not far from the writers' house in Kyiv. And then there's a street named after him, which is not far away also, and in the park. And his book, The Shore of Love, also is very interesting. Book about the old sailor who has to retire, and it takes place on the steppes, so it's obviously, you feel it inside because that's where the war is taking place. So huge portions of the war are taking place out there. So, but if you haven't read it, you want to catch some good Ukrainian literature, it's free. It's a great book to read.
It follows the story. I mean, the cathedral, the Sobor itself, is present in a village. This is under the Soviet times, and so it's used as a storage house or a warehouse.
Yes.
And all the things that happen to the human characters around it take place basically in the shadows of that building. It's been decades since I've read it, but it's definitely a good read. And the fact that it's available online that's fantastic.
Right. And the other, I'll mention another book while I'm here and we're on the Orthodox subject. I hope I'm not going too far over time. The book that Natasha and I have read, both, it's called The Sunflower in English, and it's called Heliotropion in Ukrainian or Russian. It's only in Russian. They don't have it printed in Ukrainian. It is written, and Victor, you'll recognize this, by St. John of Tobolsk, Siberia. But St. John of Tobolsk was born in Chernihiv region. He's Ukrainian. He's not Russian. So the book talks about the reason it's based on theodicy. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. It's based on the reason that bad things happen, and that it's helped us to get through the war. It's definitely worth a read, whether you're Catholic, whether you're Orthodox, whether you're Protestant. It doesn't matter what your faith background is for that book to understand it. But it's helped us to understand the war and why it's happening to a certain extent. That's it for me.
Yes, thank you. If no one is commenting on St. John of Tobolsk, then I need to mention that he was of 17th century, born in Nezhin, same place as Nikolai Gogol. At this time, it was Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, Rzecz Pospolita. Yes. And his name was Jan Maximovich Vasilkovsky. So these are wonderful. Sergei, you want to say a few words? I know you know more about him than I do.
A little comment.
Yes.
Of 11 Siberian bishops, Tobolsk bishops, of 18th century, 10 were Ukrainians.
I'm not surprised.
Ivan Maximovich was not the only one. That's all I had to say.
10 Tobolsk bishops, and Tobolsk, of course, is the oldest or one of the oldest settlements in Siberia, in Russian Empire. Sergei.
The oldest one?
The oldest, yes.
Yes.
From 17th century, obviously.
No, it was the capital of Han Kuchum.
Oh,
Yes.
at this time in Siberian Tatars,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Right.
It was overwhelmed by Yermak Cossacks, and
Yeah.
well, in this sense, maybe Tyumen is also one of two oldest.
Tyumen,
Tyumen
yes.
and Tobolsk.
Exotic Siberian geography, definitely for students and faculty right here. I have seen students who confuse Siberia with Serbia, but that's understandable.
That's
Thank you.
funny. That's funny.
Thank you very much. Do we have more comments, please, or questions from the viewers as we conclude this discussion today?
I have one more question for
Please,
you.
Larry.
How much freedom of thought and study is afforded within the Orthodox Church? What if you, for instance, in your own Bible study, were to determine that something was not really accurate? I mean, you just believe it, but you can't share that in the Orthodox Church, or could you share that with other people without violating orthodoxy? I mean, how much freedom of thought is there? Or does one kind of give that up like C.S. Lewis did when he became Church of England? He decided he wasn't going to fight the doctrines. He just accepted them all, and he fought for Christianity. I mean, is that kind of the way Orthodoxy runs?
Well, that's a rather loaded question to a certain extent, but I'll give it my best. So, Orthodoxy, when you look at it, you read about the original Orthodox churches in the Acts of the Apostles. So Orthodoxy has records that go back to the 1st century. And people have been arguing about it since the 1st century. And we're still arguing about it. So there are some things that would probably be considered heretical. But, you know, there are certain dogmas which you stay within, yes. But there's a lot of leeway as far as how to interpret things. And what we do most of the time is, if we can't figure it out on our own, we turn to what are called the Desert Fathers. These are there's a book called the Philokalia. Philokalia? I don't know if I'm saying that right. It's in Greek. But it's the writings that go back to the 1st century by monks and ascetics who were in the desert in Egypt, who were on Mount Athos. So if we have a question within Orthodoxy, the sheer number of sources that are approved by the church, or you could ask one question and have, 1,000 answers to it. So it's how should you completely depend on yourself? No, you should. We always look to tradition in the past first before we really interpret ourselves. And there's so many homilies, there's so many resources available to us that we don't really have to. Like, I tend to, myself, when I have a question, I tend to turn to the ancient sources, because they were the closest to the origins of the church. So, it's always best to go as far back to the source as you can, but it's not necessarily the Bible that you're going to. You're going off into the writing of a desert father. I don't know if that answers your question, but we after church on Sunday, we sit there and argue theology pretty much every Sunday.
Okay, that does answer my question. So it sounds like there is a lot of freedom of thought, but like you say, there are some boundaries that you operate within, but
Yes.
You're still allowed to discuss the meaning of these things.
Yes. And oh my gosh, if you knew the amount of material that was available on the Orthodox side, it's mind-blowing.
It sounds like the Philokalia. Did you call it the Philokalia? Yeah, it sounds like the Talmud.
Well, to a certain extent, yes, but it goes from I guess from about the 1st century to maybe the 11th century, the writings. But it's interpretation, and some of it's written only for monastics. So you really have to kind of like do research on who you even read within the Philokalia, because like me as a married man, I'm not going to read a monastic one who's writing for monastics, because it really doesn't do me any good, because I'm not living that lifestyle. So it's you almost have to do research on top of research before you even start reading, if that makes any sense.
Thank you very much, John. If we're finished with our comments and questions from the viewers, do we have any more? Please.
Let's see if you come on.
Katerina?
No.
No? Okay, then we will thank John Sennett for joining us today, and this is our pleasure to have him talk right from Kyiv, and we hope at some point he will come back. We're scheduling now for November and December, and hopefully things will move. We sort of a little bit forgot today about the war, which I guess is a digression talking about Middle Ages and Desert Fathers, but let's not forget that the war has been going on, and other conflicts have been shaping these cultural and religious identities for centuries. So we are really witnessing and recording the history here, and that's why we are thankful to those who are eyewitnessing it. I will thank everyone who participated, John, first of all, and Natasha. And I will ask Dr. Shrey to give our blessing to our Ukrainian viewers, please.
Дорогі браття, сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас у наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні.
Героям
Heroin
слава.
Slava.
God bless Ukraine. God bless America. Thank you all.